Hello, welcome to the Better Period series. I have never done a YouTube live before, so I hope I catch all of your comments and all of that. Nice stuff. So, first of all, some introduction. Um, this series starts today and is going to be for 3 Mondays. So, today's the first Monday. Next week is the second Monday, and then the week after that is the third Monday. So, third Monday is June 22nd, and I'm going to be going live at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And it's really about getting better periods through all the things that I talk about here on my channel, like light, um, deuterium, nature, things like that. And also with a special emphasis on anemia. So I'm going to start off today by giving you a little bit of background information. I don't want these lives to be information heavy or anything like that. I want them to kind of be information I shouldn't say information heavy. I want them to be like science light, right? Like not too technical or complicated, more on the simple side of things, and just focus on practical strategies that you can implement when it comes to better periods and anemia. But the first thing that I want to go over, and if I see any questions come through, I will like get to them relatively quickly. I'm just going to do like a brief overview. So, most of you would understand if you struggle with periods, whether you have endometriosis, adenomyosis, fibroids, heavy bleeding, just a lot of pain, not a name or a diagnosis, you understand that there's something happening with your hormones. And most of you understand that your iron, anemia, oxygen levels are being compromised. And I'd say that those are the universal understandings when it comes to this. Now, blood is really, really interesting because your red blood cells aren't just there for your periods, but the quantity of your red blood cells and what they do actually affects your hormone production. So, essentially, what that means is if you have a really heavy period, you tank your hormones every time you lose a lot of blood. And to make matters worse, in your blood, you have these little, let's call them communicators that communicate to the master controller of hormones, thyroid, adrenals, growth, bone, muscle building, called leptin, which is a hormone. And it's like the big daddy, mama, whatever of all of these. And these little communicators in your red blood cells, they have to send signals back up. But the problem is when you lose a lot of blood on your period, you also lose them. They're called porphyrins. And when you lose them, you become what I call leptin resistant. So, what's leptin resistance? You have your master leptin receptor. So, you're like controller, and then you have all of the little army men all over your body that must communicate signals back to the master guy. But imagine the master guy has a headset and a monitor and is trying to monitor everything that's happened from the army guys. And but now when you're left in resistant, this guy is blind. He's got a blindfold on, the audio doesn't work, and the screen is broken, right? So it's nothing is communicating, and that's a problem. So just in case there's someone here that's new to what leptin resistance means, and when you increase leptin resistance, as a result, you further compromise your hormones because it controls your hormones. So if it can't communicate and find out what's going on, then it's going to have an even harder time, you know, helping you make better hormones so that way your periods can be better. In order for you to have better periods, you need to have better hormones, you need to have a better circadian rhythm, signaling, all of these things. And there's some really simple things that you can do to improve that. First of all, obviously, there's the basics of sunrise, getting outside, grounding, getting sunlight, eating seasonally. Now, I'll give you a personal example. When I was struggling with something emotionally and I stopped watching the sunrise, it was extremely inconsistent, fell off of eating seasonally and appropriately for 30 days, I immediately experienced the beginnings of the reoccurrence of my endometriosis symptoms. And then when I got back on the train and realized, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. Then my symptoms improved the next cycle immediately afterwards. Now, this doesn't tend to happen for most of you if you're new to this. Meaning, if you've had really bad periods, really bad menstrual cycle for whatever reason, and you just started implementing sunrise, sunlight, grounding, eating seasonally, you're not going to immediately necessarily experience right away better periods because your body has a bunch of work to do. But if you come to a point where you've fixed almost everything and then you experience a reoccurrence, getting back on track allows you to experience the benefits a heck of a lot faster too, because your body's like a finely more finely tuned. So some really practical, easy things, again, outside of those ultra basics that I went through at the beginning, is that you want to really build up your solar calories, so your exposure to the sun, because exposure to the sun on your head and chest and your lady parts, your boobs, your pelvis is going to increase hormone production, especially if you do it at sunrise. You're going to get better hormones, and then if you do it in the middle of the day, it's going to really improve when you're on your period. So if you have pain on your period, I have three. One is like option B for option one of improving things as fast as possible. One is to basically, if you can't get outside naked, get a tan through or kiniki, whatever, cool tan bathing suit, and you are out there in the sun with your pelvis angled. So that way the sun is going to hit there as intensely as possible. This is why it's important to have something build up, because if you're white like a ghost and you're like, I'm just starting this, you're going to have to go slow, which means the pain relief you're going to get from the sun is also going to be reduced. You will experience pain relief from it. The percentage is going to depend on how bad your issues are and how many things you've already implemented. Why? Because the sun will make opioids, natural opioids, which will reduce pain, and it will do all these other things in relation to your hormones and the amount of blood that you're bleeding. Option B from step number one is if it's, freezing cold, winter, whatever, pouring rain. I love to use the red light panel with basically when you're sitting on the floor with your legs on either side of it. I only like the small one because the bigger ones are just super impractical for this. And you angle it right at your pelvis. And it does a good job at beginning to relieve pain. Again, how much and bleeding. And then the third one is the cold, which I've been extremely hesitant to try for a really long time and started trying it and recommending it. I used to say never to do cold therapy on your period, mostly because I had never tried it. And that's the generic, no data really behind it recommendation. But the cold doesn't constrict your blood vessels if you're doing it at temps of, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what I would recommend to do. If you stay in there for longer than like 5 minutes, if you're only in there for like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute, then yeah, you're constricting everything. But then what happens is as you stay in there and your body relaxes, it actually increases blood flow. But cold does do something to your pain receptors. It also relieves the heavy feeling that you might have in your uterus when you have a bad period. So, those are really cool tips that honestly, the first time I tried it, I could not believe that it actually helped that much and that I actually wanted to go inside and stay in the cold plunge for so long on the first 2 days of my period. Like, it was a really odd thing to do. Now, I would say that the best thing would be for you to try it when you're not on your period first to know what you're in for, because the level of apprehension I find increases when you're on the first couple days of your period. So typically, for example, when I work with clients in my program specifically for bad periods, I will have them tan their pelvis on the daily to begin to help them make better hormones, along with the basic things that I mentioned at the beginning. So you have to reset your circadian rhythm and think of it like this. How does your body know that 28 days have passed? How does your body know that, hey, okay, this day, this 24-hour cycle that I have to put these hormones out, because your hormones change during the day and at night. They're not exactly the same. The levels are not the same throughout the entire day. They change like minute to minute, not exactly, but sort of. And you get the idea. Like, how does your body actually know to do that? If it has absolutely no concept of time, that would be impossible. And if it's set to the wrong time, everything is going to be messed up. So if you set it to the right time, then that hormone cycle is going to be better. And I like to remind people that, well, everyone likes to think of hormone production as like it's your ovaries, it's your uterus, it's your lining releasing hormones. The act of creating a hormone begins in the inner mitochondrial membrane, which you've got like trillions of them, trillions of mitochondria in your body at any given time. For those of you here who are new to it, kind of this terms, they're basically little things in your cell that not just make energy, information, communicate, are responsible for expression of genetics, etc. But the production of a hormone starts there. So if that part of it is not working properly, if it's compromised for absolutely any reason, then obviously your hormone production is going to be messed up. And my personal favorite is I do not like iron, iron infusions, or supplementation for that because it doesn't make sense. And I've said this before many times where it would like be the equivalent of donating blood on one arm and being bled out on the other arm. It just doesn't add up. Never mind the fact that your supplement isn't like receiving a blood donation on the arm. It would be like receiving a dropper of blood on the other arm while you're bleeding out on the other if you have a heavy period. So it doesn't make any sense. So I do short term like to use herbs to cut the flow because if you can't tolerate alcohol for herbal tinctures, then I would go with glycerin based tinctures. But they are effective in the short term because if you can't cut that flow, then your recovery just becomes a heck of a lot longer. And you know, I also it bears to be mentioned that if you have a big problem like endometriosis or adenomyosis, you're going to have a bigger recovery curve or it's going to take you longer. And sometimes having surgery for endometriosis, for example, can shorten the curve because I like to simply think of it this way. If you have something like an endometriosis growth growing outside of your uterus, right, where it's not supposed to grow, then your body, in order to eliminate it, it must first, one, realize that it's there when signaling is restored. Two, activate the mitochondria because they're the ones who tell which cells to die or live to say, hey guys, are you working properly? Because the mitochondria is supposed to be going to the endometrial cells that are living outside and say, you're not supposed to be here and kill them and force them to commit suicide. And it requires your mitochondria to be working properly. Then, after it does that, it has to repair that area. So, if scar tissue was formed or whatever it is that happened, then it must repair that. And then you kind of get to, the much better situation with healing. Whereas, at least what I've seen is if something like endometriosis is really bad and you have someone who's good, remove most of the lesions and actually do a good job and not a crappy job. And then you support that afterwards, your recovery curve is faster. You get that kind of more immediate benefit right after that you can then sustain by making sure your mitochondria are effectively acting as the police and making sure that your endometrial cells like don't be naughty and go away from where they're supposed to go. So, um, some probably my favorite tips, just to recap, would be getting that tanning your private parts, tanning your boobs, tanning your pelvis, and the head and neck is a really easy one, especially in the winter when it's really cold. That means no shawls. If you live somewhere where it's cold, no shawls and keep your hat, so your face is exposed to the sun. And the same goes in the summer. Obviously, you have to work your way up to it if you're white as a ghost and don't have a good tan going. So you can't immediately go out in the midday sun without a hat. And I will only wear a hat in the tropics in the midday sun because otherwise I don't really need it. And it's typically because I'm reading or something. Otherwise, I can't see the book because of the glare of the sun, right? But you're going to have to work your way up to that. You can't just go from always wearing a hat and always hiding to all of a sudden pulling it off. You just can't do that. But those are easy ones. And honestly, like it's one of those things that is hard to believe until you try it for yourself, until you have a bad period and you go outside and you try to get as much sun there as possible and you notice the difference that you feel. The other strange tips that I have that tend to work for many people is to change the way you eat. So, on your heavy days of your period, you want to eat light or foods. So, you don't want to eat as much. You want to eat a lot less than you normally do. And for many people with really bad periods, they don't have as much of an appetite. But even for people who do, and they do have an appetite, trying to keep it light is helping. And also, unless you're autoimmune, on top of any period issues that you have, adding spicy food like hot pepper, things like that to your foods, I found really helpful in improving the pain and reducing the heavy bleeding. And another really interesting tip that I've run into recently is if you have endometriosis and you have pain mid-cycle when you're ovulating, that's really bad, doing carbonated water with baking soda added into it. So, like a quarter of a teaspoon to start when you're not full. So, not right after you eat, but when your stomach is relatively empty, tends to work really interestingly well in helping to reduce that. And obviously, the same applies whether you're having pain on your period or outside of your period, that when you're going outside and you expose that area to the sun, you're going to produce those opioids, endorphins, and relieve the pain amongst the other benefits that you're going to experience with that. Um, what else? I had notes in here. So I have a lot of notes on anemia and stuff like that, ferritin, which I'm going to get into next Monday. But the other thing I want to mention is the sun's going to be stronger at helping you when it comes to pain, whether on your period or outside of your period, if you can angle yourself correctly, than a light panel. And the reason for that is because you have a lot of wavelengths in the sun. The intensity, um, in a specific light panel can be quite strong. So you can pump, let's say, several hours into a few minutes. Typically the ones that are at home are not super, super strong. And most of them don't come with ultraviolet light as well. So the combination in the sun of the ultraviolet, the red and infrared, and the intensity and the heat of that is going to have a stronger effect on you than using the panel. But I totally get it when it's freezing cold or pouring rain or something like that, that you would want the panel because I've done that many times in the past. And, most of my clients who are in climates that are really cold or have a cold season or tons of rain and cold will use one for sure. So that's just something to consider. The other thing to consider is that if you have endometriomas or significant growths there that you're concerned about, then you want to actually use ultraviolet and infrared if you're using a panel instead of using the red. So you want to turn off the red or reduce the red. So I have an EMR tech. So, for example, typically for me, that would look like the COB light and the ultraviolet light together and keeping the LEDs off. I actually wanted to ask them what percentage the COB is infrared versus red because I'm not 100% sure. Some other brands will allow you to turn the red off entirely and then just leave you with the infrared, which is what you want, and some interesting work hacks that you can think of. So let's say it's cold or you're somewhere where you can have lamps on your office. Maybe you don't work from home, you work in an office, but they'll allow you to have a lamp. Then I like the infrared reptile bulbs and the ultraviolet A black light. So like the Halloween type lights that you can find anywhere that are super cheap. And if you want to take things a step further, you can get a green LED light because we're going to talk about that um, either next Monday or the Monday after on the green light. But those would be kind of your like cheap, easy hacks where you're putting them on your desk. If you can't open the window, you can't get outside enough because different jobs are totally different, obviously. Um, Again, for anyone that's just jumping in, I'm trying to watch a chat. Hopefully, I'm not missing anything in the chat. I can't see anything, so hopefully that's accurate. But if you have any questions or anything you want me to talk about, that's kind of what this is all about. So feel free to pop something in there. Even if I kind of talked to it before, I can go over it in a little more detail. Otherwise, next week, I'm going to talk about anemia, a lot of anemia and ferritin hacks, and understanding a little bit about that as well. Um, but yeah. So, thank you everyone for joining me on here. I hope that it was useful. It will be posted to my channel so anyone can rewatch it after. And any questions that you come up with if you're watching the recording, post it in the comments and I will add it to what I'm going to be discussing next week. So, thank you so much for joining me live.